Good day, ladies and gentlemen. And for the second time, we have with us Dr. Robert Adams. So, for those who don't know, Dr. Robert Adams is a former American Navy SEAL commander, a former Delta Force colonel, and who became a doctor of medicine at the age of 40 while having two kids. And now he's a best selling author of three books, which have been sold in over 13 countries. So, it's such a honor to have you with us, Dr. Adams. And we want to start up with the first question. So, please explain to us, Dr. Adams, why did you start to study medicine at 36 and you graduated at the age of 40? And it was not easy while having two children.
Well, it's actually relatively simple to explain. Most people that know about Navy SEALs know that they are tremendous athletes and high achievers in the military system, but it's not a skill set that easily translates into the older years. As you get older, it's harder and harder to climb up the side of the building or jump out of an airplane safely. And so I found myself as a newly promoted commander, senior officer in the SEAL teams, not really able to do the things I used to do in my youth. So I started looking around for another profession, honestly, that could give me the same sort of love and excitement of my job that being a younger Navy SEAL caused. And the only thing in my life that had ever excited me, looking back, had been a course I'd taken in college in biology. I loved biology. It fascinated me. And I said, well, who does biology? And I thought, well, I think doctors do. So I started looking into that. And one day I walked home to my wife. We'd just had our first child. And I was in my early 30s. And I said, hey, I think I want to go to medical school. She went, what? Okay. If you think that's what's going to make you happy, go for it. And so it took me 3.5 years of going to school at night, working full time to get all the prerequisites done, retake some of my college courses that, were over 10 years old and schools won't accept them. So, but 3.5 years later, I did get accepted to medical school. And I had told my wife when I said I want to go back to medical school is that I wanted to stay in the military.
Okay.
And she didn't like that idea very much, but she gave me permission. And so when the medical school acceptance came in, I fired off a scholarship request to the Army and the Navy. A lot of people ask me why I became an Army doctor. And the simple answer is the Navy offered me a 3-year scholarship and the Army offered me a 4-year scholarship, and I changed uniforms because, that school's expensive. And I had now 2 children to take care of.
Absolutely. Very inspiring. Very inspiring. So, for those who don't know, today, we're going to talk about Dr. Adams' second book, Swords and Saints. Right? I hope. Yep, that's the book. Right. All right. Swords and Saints, A Doctor's Journey. So it's a very good book, actually, one of the best books that I have read. So can you explain to us how this book could help ordinary people and medical doctors as well?
So that's a great question, because that's exactly why I wrote this book. I did not want my 35 years in medicine and the amazing stories, each chapter being its own story of life, death, birth, to go into obscurity and, never be told when I die. So, I just said to my wife, I got to write these stories down. I used them as teaching lessons for my residents and my medical students, and also for my patients. I said, you need to learn from my life experiences as a physician. So I wrote it for patients to understand the process and the long, long process that a doctor must go through to become competent in his profession. So patients, the lesson there is that you don't need to be afraid to ask your doctor if he's sure, because it takes a very long time for an MD to be a good MD, medical doctor. And then the other piece of the pie is I want future doctors In India, I'm told if you're born a Patel, you're going to be a doctor. So I want every Patel in India to read this book and decide if that's what you really want to do. And I say that because when I was in the Army, every time I met a Dr. Patel, they would tell me, "Oh yeah, our whole families are doctors." But I want them to read the book and understand the long and painful and expensive process involved in becoming a doctor, and then realize, no matter what your profession, the probability of life and death decisions being in your hands. And so I think personally, every potential medical student, nurse, or doctor should read this book just to get a feel for what the life they're choosing really entails.
Absolutely, because I read it. I was pretty impressed. I mean, there were chapters in this book I was pretty impressed with. I even learned. And I was like shocked. Like, I mean, so much like certain basic things, I mean, which even some doctors don't know, but it's great. Thank you for that. And could you describe to us any significant chapters in your book?
Of course, I have some favorite chapters. And the first one is a chapter that I have a hard time telling people about without choking up every time I tell it, because it's the chapter about the near death of my son when I was a third-year medical student. First 2 years of medicine is nothing but book work. You're in the classroom all day for 2 years, learning your anatomy, physiology, and basic sciences. And then all of a sudden, third year, you're in the hospital and you're seeing patients and you know a little bit about medicine. And what happened, and it was in retrospect very much my fault, is when we're medical students, we wear short white coats. Doctors wear long white coats. And I would bring my white coat home with me every day with my stethoscope and my books and my germs all over it. And we were confused why my children started getting sick in the third year of medicine, because I was bringing germs home with me on my white coat. And by the way, we fixed that real quick once this story happened. But the story begins with my son getting a sore throat, which turned out to be strep throat, a very common pediatric illness. But in his rare case, it developed an abscess. It started dissecting down his tonsils and into his throat tissues. And, we ran him to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, he's got strep throat. Here's some antibiotics. Take it," which we tried to give him, but throat was hard to swallow. And I made the compounding mistake of waiting to see if he would get better. And unfortunately, we took him to the doctor on Friday. And on Saturday, he was sicker, not better. And on Sunday, he was so swollen, his neck was out like this, his tongue was out like that, in order to breathe. And I'm going, "Oh, I should take him to the emergency room because this is obviously not good." But I didn't know what it was. And, I made the horrible mistake that any father or mother can easily make. Going, I don't want to, question the doc, trying to give him the medicine like he said. And my wife had taken him back to the Saturday doctor, who said, "Hey, he's got strep throat, keep giving him the medicine." Well, by Monday morning, my son was in extremis, having trouble breathing, and I had to go to work early. So my wife put my son in the backseat of the car, drove it to the doctor's, same pediatrician's office, and was waiting in the parking lot when the doctor arrived at about 7 in the morning. My wife and my son, he smiling, he walks over to shake her hand and say, "Hello, Mrs. Adams, how are you?" And he looks in the back seat at my son and he goes, "Oh my God," because he could see immediately what was wrong. And he goes, "Don't get your son out of the car. I'm calling a surgeon right now. Your son has an abscess in his neck. He needs surgery now. Go." And he said, "I'm calling the chief of ear, nose, and throat surgery. He'll meet you in his office." So my wife, drove rapidly 4 blocks away to the medical school, got to the surgeon's office to discover that the surgeon was in surgery. So she had to wait from 7:30 to 9:30 till the surgeon came in. Surgeon walks in and goes, "Hello, Mrs. Adams." And he looks at her and he goes, "Oh my God." He took one look at my son. He goes, "Stop right there. This is an emergency." He looks at his secretary. This is the part that chokes me up when I remember it. He looks at the secretary and says, call the CT scanner, tell anybody on the table to get off the table, emergency is coming. Call the operating room staff, tell them shift change does not happen. We're going to be operating in 10 minutes. And everybody in this hospital owes me a favor, and I'm calling them all in right now. And I'm going, what? He goes, Bob, get your son down to the CT scanner, get him to the operating room. I'll meet you there. Your son needs surgery. Ran him down in the wheelchair to the CT scanner. The doors were open. The doctor was waiting. He didn't know it was coming, and he says, well, throw your son on the CT scanner. Let's take the pictures. And, only 2 minutes later, he comes back with these wet films, and he holds them up to the light like this, and he goes, oh my God. And he says, take these quickly to surgery. So obviously they didn't look good. So I run to the operating room, and the anesthesiologist has a bed waiting. He's standing there with a needle in his hand. He goes right this way, puts him on the bed, puts a needle in, gets IV going, gives him some sedation. And the surgeon, and they run off into the operating room. They said, Bob, it's going to be about 45 minutes. I'll come out and talk to you. Well, 2.5 hours later, this surgeon comes back out soaked with sweat all the way to his waist. He goes, I've never seen anything as bad as what I saw today. And your son is intubated and neuromuscularly blocked, and he's going to the ICU. I think we got it all. He goes, but if that pus pockets had eroded into a vessel, he would have died on the operating room table. And we're just going, oh, well, long story short, that chapter ends with the happy ending that he survived the surgery and the difficult times in the ICU. And there's a second chapter that talks about that and how scared it was as a parent, not knowing what was going on, whether your son was going to live or die. And I end my chapter by saying, and it changed me forever. I knew something that most parents hopefully never have to know, how scary it is to potentially lose a child.
Absolutely.
And, I encourage everybody to look at that, because that's me in my earliest days. And if you'll indulge me, I want to fast forward to one more chapter.
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Please, go ahead.
So I'm going to give one more chapter.
Sure.
And now this one, we're going to fast forward 20 years almost. And now I'm a full bird colonel in the United States Army. And I find myself as a family physician in Iraq, supporting the 82nd Airborne Division as their senior doctor. And we've built clinics out of the rubble of the war zones, and we're taking care of our patients and our soldiers. And on this particular night that this story begins, I'm on call in my small building clinic. It's 2:00 in the morning. I'm asleep on a cot in the back, and they come and wake me up and said, Dr. Adams, there's a casualty coming in. And it didn't rain in the desert very often, but on this particular night in Iraq, it was raining, so the helicopters couldn't fly. And the reason I was being wakened up is that a enemy combatant who had tried to attack our senior headquarters as a suicide truck driver had been shot. He'd arm amputation, multiple gunshot wounds, but we're Americans and we save lives. And so he came to my clinic for what's called an ambulance transfer. And we had to stabilize him 2 hours to get him to us. We had to stabilize him and then send him 2 hours further, actually 3.5 hours further on our ambulance to get to the surgeons. And the chances of him surviving it was not good, but we were going to try, because what doctors do is save lives, and what uniform you wear doesn't matter. And that's been true of every war that the United States has ever fought. And so, I said, I told the medic that woke me, quick, go back to the barracks area. I have to drive over there and wake a couple people up. I need another doctor and I need another nurse here, get them down here. And as is typical in situations like this, my entire staff showed up at 2:00 in the morning, and we got the room ready. This enemy soldier arrived, and he had an amputated arm, multiple gunshot wounds in the chest, no exit wounds in the back, and an IV in his neck and an IV in his leg, both of which had failed. And we needed to get an IV in him so I could give him some morphine and some medication, some fluids. And I couldn't do it. And I called my pediatrician that was there. I said, hey, You're a pediatrician. You can put a scalp vein in a little baby. So get an IV in this guy. Well, his name was Craig Dobson, young captain right out of medical school,
Okay.
or I read a residency, I mean, and he tried and he couldn't do it.
Okay.
And so we're kind of looking at each other. And I had trained with the Army's Delta Force in advanced trauma life support. And
Okay.
I had trained on animals on how to do something called a venous cut down. And just because, to do an IV, you have to get a needle into a vein.
Okay.
So if the veins are all flat because he's bled so much, you can't do it. So I made a cut around his ankle. I dissected down. I found the vein. I thread the needle in it. I tied it off. We started the IV and it worked immediately. And I'd never done that on a human being before. And we all looked at each other and went, wow, it worked. And high five all around. Well, the reason I tell this story is he is awake and talking to us. He is in pain. And we think, we might be able to save him, but we've got to send him on a 3.5-hour ambulance ride now. And my medics are 18 years old. They're brand new, right out of school, teenagers still. And the rules in the Army is doctors don't go on ambulance transfers because they're too dangerous. Because people shoot at you, Ever since Vietnam and Korea, we've learned that Red Crosses are targets when there's a war going on. My young pediatrician gets in the ambulance with the medic that's going to take this ambulance 3.5 hours away. And he's trying to show him how to draw up morphine. And the medic is confused. He's never done this before. And he leans out the window. He looks at me and goes, "Colonel, I have to go on this ambulance ride." I said, "Captain, you know the rules. Doctors don't go. It's too dangerous. I only have a few doctors. I need you here." And he looked at me and he goes, "I need to go." And I wasn't sure what he was saying, but I said, "All right, I'm the boss here. I'm gonna let you go.
Okay.
Please get back here tomorrow and don't get shot." And what I learned from him after he read the chapter I wrote about this was that he went to the convoy commander, because the ambulance is flanked on both sides by gunships, basically 82nd Airborne armored vehicles with guns pointing out of every weapon to protect the ambulance while it's transferring.
Okay.
And he goes, it's now 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. It's still raining. It's dark. And if we go the safe route to the surgeons, which is a 3.5-hour ambulance ride, this patient's not going to make it. So he goes to the commander of that convoy and he says, "I'd like permission to drive this convoy right through the center of bad guy country, right through their town that are occupied, because I can get to the surgeons in an hour and a half."
Okay.
And the convoy commander said, "Doc, it's your call and we'll protect you." And they went through that bad guy country at high speed, locked and loaded, and they surprised him. And they got through without a shot being fired. And that soldier lived. And when he came back to me and told me what he'd done that night, I said, "Well, Captain, you're my hero." And that's that's the title of that chapter, My Hero.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I guess for all those who are watching, just want to do a recap. So there are many adventures like this, mini adventures. Mini adventures. You have many adventures in this book. So many of you all can learn a lot of things from it. And the last question is, Dr. Bob, could you summarize this book in one sentence?
Yeah, and no, not really. I have to use at least 2 or 3 sentences, but briefly, as I had said earlier, these are stories that cover 35 years of medicine, pediatrics, obstetrics, geriatrics, life and death, and it's really a single book looking at the life of a physician at war and peace, and their stories that needed to be told and needed to be preserved for the patients and the doctors of the future.
Okay, brilliant, perfect. So thank you very much, Dr. Bob, for taking this time and mentioning about your book. And just one last thing, any message to all the people? Yeah, all the people watching this?
No, it's available on audiobooks, and it's available on Amazon, both in Kindle and in print version. But you know, the audiobook people have been very good about producing this with a professional actor, and his voice is beautiful. So if people want to just listen to the book, check out the audiobooks on Amazon.
Great. Excellent. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Bob. So this is Dr. Robert Adams and Watson Michael signing out. Take care.
Pleasure to be back with you again. Thank you.
Absolutely.